Drug lords and cartel members are known for the brutalities that they inflict on their victims and enemies, but the same people become completely unrecognizable when they are caught and sent to prison. Over the past few decades, many cartel members have had to spend some or all of their lifetime in prison, and the way they live while behind bars is different from what they are used to outside the prison walls. So, how exactly are cartel members and drug lords treated in prison? Are they subjected to the same level of torture and inhumane behavior as they do to their victims while free? Watch this video till the very end, as we tell you everything about the treatment that cartel members get in prison. El Chapo.
Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's final day in court ended the way everyone expected, with the Sinaloa cartel leader sentenced to life in prison, plus an extra 30 years for good measure.
The date was July 19, 2019, when El Chapo entered his 75-square-foot cell in Florence, Colorado, marking the end of a forgettable era in Mexico's cartel history. But it also began a new phase of life for El Chapo, which was no less than hell. El Chapo didn't know what was waiting for him when he was extradited to the United States, sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, and moved to the United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, or famously known as ADX Florence in Colorado. But as soon as he entered the maximum security prison, reality began to hit El Chapo. It was a nightmare for him. About the condition he was being kept in, El Chapo wrote a letter to the judge and told him the following: "I have suffered a lot. Due to the treatment in ADMATS, I now suffer from headaches, memory loss, muscle cramps, stress and depression. I have suffered a lot." The harrowing experiences shared by El Chapo make it clear that the former drug lord is not having the time of his life in the toughest prison in the United States. But the letter is just the crux of the matter. But before we get into details of why El Chapo is facing different treatment from the prison authorities, it is important to know why exactly he is in a US prison. El Chapo was the co-founder of the infamous Guadalajara cartel in the 1980s, but the shots used to be called by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, until the Mexican sicarios killed a DEA agent named Enrique Camarena Salazar. The killing of the DEA agent caused a huge amount of chaos in Mexico, which is exactly what El Chapo needed to ascend the ranks of the Sinaloa cartel. During a meeting of the top Mexican drug lords of the time, Félix Gallardo appointed El Chapo and Ismael El Mayo Zambada as the leaders of the cartel. Fast forward to the 21st century, El Chapo planned and executed two of the most mind-blowing prison escapes, but he didn't know a living hell awaited him when he would be arrested for the third time. Extradition to the United States. On January 8, 2016, 17 Marines from the Mexican Navy Special Forces and Federal Police raided El Chapo's home and arrested him. This time, Mexico didn't keep El Chapo for long, and he was extradited straight to the US. Despite being a wanted man in 7 different states, Mexican extradition law required the US to guarantee that El Chapo wouldn't be sentenced to death if he was found guilty of homicide charges. But what awaited El Chapo in the US prison was much worse than the death penalty. Guzman was extradited to the United States on January 19, 2017. The man who was a symbol of terror in his home country was himself terrorized when he landed in the foreign land. He knew that it was the end of his story as a drug lord, because now there was no way out. El Chapo trial spanned for over 2 years, and on July 17, 2019, he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. The sentence was not much of a nightmare for El Chapo, as the place he was going to spend the rest of his life in, the ADX Florence, Colorado, was his home for the remainder of his life now. This prison has a reputation of testing even the strongest of men like El Chapo.
ADX Florence is closed off to the rest of the world. On the outside, armed security guards, gun towers, and cameras. On the inside, pure isolation. Inmates spend an average of 23 hours a day in a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell.
The ADX Florence is a nightmare for even the most wanted and ruthless of the criminals and cartel members. Every prisoner was confined to their cell for 23 hours a day, including El Chapo. and the 1 hour that they get to leave their cell, they are allowed in a slightly bigger area. But there is no fixed hour of when the prisoners would be taken out of their cell, be it day or night. The prison management can choose any hour of the day as the recreational period. But this free time also comes with some strict rules. Depending upon how dangerous an individual is, the inmates are kept in handcuffs or shackles, or both. As for El Chapo, he always has his hands cuffed and shackles in his feet because of his track record of escaping from even the most secure prisons. The area where the inmates are allowed during this free time looks like a put or an empty pool. Yes, it is bigger than the cell, but the so-called outdoor area is smaller than you think. Just 10 steps in a straight line and 30 in a circle. This is just one aspect of the ADX. Let's talk about food now. Each meal is properly checked before it's served to the inmates. The checking is to make sure that the food doesn't contain anything that could be used by the inmates to either harm themselves or the correctional officers. Not all inmates have the luxury of eating in the facility's dining room. Prisoners as dangerous as El Chapo have to eat inside their cells and aren't allowed to come out during food breaks. The reason for this is to make sure that he didn't break any piece of the tray to use it as a weapon. But El Chapo's problems don't stop there. While the other inmates get a normal bed, chair, and table in their rooms, El Chapo's room has all these accessories made out of concrete. Even the toilet of the infamous drug lord's cell is not a usual one and is designed for one flush at a time. There are 6 different security levels in the ADX. One of these is called the General Population Unit. This is the unit where El Chapo is kept and being watched 24/7. So there is no privacy regardless of anything he does in his cell. According to his lawyers, Guzman can't get any sleep because the prison guards harass him day in and day out, which has mentally affected him, resulting in his deteriorated health. To make things worse, his family is not allowed to visit either. And all of this makes one thing clear: there is no way El Chapo can get out of the ADX. El Padrino. Now let's talk about the man who elevated El Chapo to run the Guadalajara Cartel. Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, or El Padrino, which means the Godfather, was one of the founders of the Guadalajara Cartel. It is said that, in the 1980s, the Guadalajara Cartel controlled much of the drug business in Mexico and was in charge of the drug smuggling into the United States from across the border. Although Félix evaded capture initially because of political protection, he was finally arrested on April 8, 1989, for ordering the killing of Enrique Kiki Camarena, who was a DEA agent. He was charged by both the Mexican and the American authorities with the murder of Camarena, drug smuggling, racketeering, and other violent crimes. The drug lord was initially sentenced to 40 years in prison, but got an additional 37 years in 2017 after he had served 28 years of his initial sentence. While in prison, Félix Gallardo complained about the poor living conditions he was forced to live in. He said because of the inhumane conditions, he suffered from deafness, vertigo, loss of an eye, and experienced blood circulation problems. He was kept in an 8x14 cell and wasn't even allowed to use the recreational area. In 2011, El Padrino's family wrote an open letter and blamed the jail authorities for mistreating the former drug lord. It was revealed by the family that Félix Gallardo was being kept in a living hell with no regard for his rights as a human. According to the open letter, which was published in almost every newspaper of the country as a full-page advertisement, Félix was being kept in total isolation and wasn't allowed to meet anyone, not even other inmates in the prison. The drug lord was also prevented from doing any exercise or even taking a walk. The concerning part of the open letter was where it described the condition of El Padrino's cell. The family complained that not only was Félix Gallardo's cell unhygienic, but it also had a foul smell with no windows for sunlight. El Padrino was also banned from having his family visit him in prison. To make things worse, the former drug lord didn't even get the necessary medical treatment for some serious illnesses, such as ulcers and hernia. Although the federal authorities approved the transfer of Félix from the high-security prison to a medium-security prison in 2014, the court kept denying his request to serve the remainder of his sentence at his home until 2022, when he was finally granted house arrest. Cartel members do everything in their power to avoid getting extradited to the United States, because they know that a week in an American high-security prison is worse than a year in a prison of their own country. Cárdenas Guillén. Osiel Cárdenas Guillén is another Mexican drug lord and head of the Gulf Cartel, one of the oldest organized crime groups in Mexico. Initially, Cárdenas had nothing to do with drugs and was a mechanic, but after the arrest of Juan García Abrego, a famous drug lord of the 1990s, he entered the drug business when he killed Abrego's competitor, Salvador Gómez Herrera, which earned him the nickname Matamigos. Cárdenas was considered an unimportant player in the cartel business until his standoff with two DEA agents in 1999. Although Cárdenas didn't kill the American agents, it triggered a massive crackdown on both the Gulf Cartel and its leadership. Both the American and the Mexican government increased their efforts to capture Cárdenas. Within no time, he had gone from a minor drug lord to one of the most wanted criminals in both the US and Mexico. So much so that the authorities placed a $2 million bounty for his arrest. Cárdenas remained hidden from the authorities for the next 4 years, but on the 14th of March 2003, the infamous drug lord was arrested during a shootout between the Mexican military and the armed men of the Gulf Cartel. Cárdenas was extradited to the United States in 2007 and was charged with conspiracy to smuggle large amounts of drugs into the country. He was given 25 years in prison and was initially sent to a medium security prison in Florida and Atlanta. Because of the deal that Cárdenas had signed with the US authorities, he had several privileges, including recreation time, the facility of a library, and a free walk to meals. But the fortunes changed when Cárdenas was transferred to a maximum security facility in Colorado. Yes, you guessed it right, the ADX in Florence, where El Chapo would be incarcerated a few years later. The bad days were over for Cárdenas, and the worst days had arrived. Cárdenas was confined to a vault-like cell and was let out of the room for only 10 hours a week. This time could be used by the prisoners for doing exercise or stretching their legs after being confined to their cell for the most part of the week. Cárdenas was also allowed to have family visits and was treated better by the prison guards. But not all cartel members get the same treatment in prison as El Chapo and El Padrino. Some cartel members make use of the legal loopholes to live a life of luxury even behind bars. Here are a few drug lords whose experience of the prison was completely different to what we've seen so far. El Queenie. Abigail González Valencia, or El Queenie, is a name still feared by many in Mexico. The former leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel was so powerful that his operations weren't only limited to Mexico and South America. Rather, he trafficked drugs in Europe and Asia as well. El Queenie used to work for the Milenio cartel in the 1990s, but then he formed part of the original group that founded the CJNG. He was also the head of Los Queenies, an organization allied to the CJNG. The law enforcement agencies became active against El Queenie when it was discovered that he was smuggling drugs to international markets across the globe. On February 28, 2015, the Federal Police, National Security Commission, and the Office of the General Prosecutor conducted a joint operation in Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco, and arrested González Valencia. After being found guilty of different crimes related to drug trafficking, El Queenie was sentenced and moved to the Reclusorio Norte prison in Mexico City. While most criminals fear going to such a high-security prison because of the inhumane treatment of the prisoners, El Queenie found a legal loophole to turn the prison into his private mansion. The godfather of the jail allows special amenities if a prisoner pays for them. You can even buy your own cell for just $790 and get privileges like TV, internet, and family visits for separate payments. There is also a service that allows you to hire another inmate as your servant or personal assistant. El Queenie knew the legal loophole, so he fully exploited it, because money is never an issue for the drug lords. In a recording that was published by Milenio, El Queenie was heard telling someone all the luxuries he had in the Reclusorio Norte prison. Imagine a prison where you have your own cell, a backyard, a personal chef, and everything a person needs to stay connected to the outside world. Upon discovering how El Queenie had exploited the legal loophole, the Mexican authorities moved him to the maximum security prison of Altipano. However, his lawyers filed a protection order, which brought El Queenie back to Reclusorio Norte within 3 days of his transfer. Fito. Jose Adolfo Macías Villamar, who is also known as Fito, is a drug trafficker based in Ecuador. While in prison, Macías became the leader of Los Choneros cartel after the previous head, Jorge Luis Zambrano, was murdered in 2020. Fito was first arrested in 2011 for drug trafficking, but he soon escaped. 2 years later, he was recaptured along with other members of his cartel, but it seemed that jail had little to no impact on his lifestyle. As time passed, Fito became more influential and powerful inside and outside the prison and started running from behind bars. But he wasn't doing this from a small cell in the La Regional prison. Rather, had a proper setup that, according to an official, was better than at home. Fito lived like a king in the prison, with luxuries that most people outside couldn't even imagine. He had a personal grassy lawn that was filled with his pet fighting roosters. His room was no less than a luxury suite in a high-end hotel. The walls were properly colored and even had a mural of the cartel leader. Everyone in the prison, including the guards, were under Fito's control and acted as his personal butlers. From TV to the internet, women and alcohol, the Ecuadorian drug lord received everything he wished for from the prison management. When the lavish lifestyle of Fito was discovered by the higher authorities in 2023, he was transferred to the Rock Maximum Security Complex. Macías had all the luxuries one could possibly imagine while in prison, but he's still no match to the next drug lord on the list, who built his own prison. Yes, you heard it right. Let's see how Pablo Escobar was treated while he was in prison. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, or Don Pablo, as his men and partners called him, needs no introduction. The king of cocaine was one of the wealthiest criminals of all time, having a net worth of $30 billion, which in today's currency would amount to $70 billion. Boss of the infamous Medellin cartel, Pablo rose to prominence when he started smuggling huge amounts of cocaine into the United States in the 1980s. He wasn't like most of the drug lords we hear and read about, and was even an elected member of the Colombian Chamber of Representatives in 1982. But as they say, every tide has its ebb. Luis Carlos Galán, a journalist and a politician who was running for Colombia's presidency, was assassinated in 1989. The Colombian government believed that Pablo Escobar was behind the killing of Galán and decided to move against the drug lord. But it was almost impossible to catch the drug lord without causing widespread bloodshed, so the government negotiated a deal with Pablo and convinced him to surrender and stop his criminal activities in exchange for a reduced sentence and preferential treatment during captivity. The prison Pablo Escobar and his men were sent to was completely different to where El Chapo is being held at, named La Catedral. The prison was situated on the hills of Medellin and oversaw the city. You must be wondering, what was so special or different about this particular prison as compared to the ADX? It might be hard to believe, but this prison was built by Pablo Escobar himself, just to serve his time as part of his deal with the Colombian government. Pablo made sure that there was a law in place that prevented his extradition to the United States. For this purpose, he allegedly bribed members of the Colombian parliament who passed a controversial law in 1991 prohibiting extradition of Colombian citizens to the United States. The facility was designed and built strictly to Escobar's requirements, and he even had the choice to choose his own guards. It is believed that the prison was less a prison and more of a fortress that ensured that Escobar stayed safe from his several enemies at the time. It was built on a steep slope, which made it extremely difficult to attack the facility. Escobar feared that La Catedral might be raided by US forces using helicopters, and he might be taken to the States to face the innumerable charges that were piled up against him. So he had anti-aircraft guns set up around the prison to shoot down any plane that might try to land in or near the prison. La Catedral had amenities that even high-end hotels lack. The luxurious prison featured a football pitch, a bar, jacuzzi, a giant dollhouse for his daughter, and even a waterfall. This is why it was often referred to as Hotel Escobar or Club Medellin. Another reason for giving that particular name to the prison was because of how easy it was to bring women into the prison. There was no restriction whatsoever, because the condition in Escobar's agreement with the government that allowed him to appoint the guards of his choice made sure that the prison guards intentionally looked away from all that was happening inside the prison. It was a club in the true sense, and the indoor play area even had a roulette table where Escobar's men gambled day day in and day out. Escobar even had a telescope installed in the prison that allowed him to look into his family's residence in Medellin City while talking to them on the phone. But Pablo's lavish arrangement with the government soon fell apart when it was reported that he had 4 of his men tortured and murdered inside La Catedral. The Colombian government decided to move Pablo to a standard prison in the country, but the drug lord was not going to let that happen. On July 22, 1992, after being in La Catedral for more than a year, Pablo fled through a secret escape route amid fierce fight with the authorities. After escaping, Escobar went into hiding because he wasn't only being chased by law enforcement agencies, but his rivals were also looking for him. And after a 16-month-long manhunt that cost the government hundreds of people and millions of dollars, Escobar was finally traced on the 2nd of December, 1993. Despite the attempt by the authorities to arrest Pablo, he didn't turn himself in and was killed in a gunfire exchange. Cartel members and drug lords are a sign of terror when they are free and operating their businesses. But the same people appear to be different human beings when they are arrested and put behind bars. The stories like that of El Chapo Guzman, Pablo Escobar, and other cartel leaders show that not all cartel members are treated the same while in prison. Some of them are able to enjoy the same luxuries behind bars that they had before they were arrested, but for people like El Chapo, it's a different story.